China, which wants to become an Arctic power, would love to be able to sail its submarines through the Bering Strait, across the Arctic Ocean, and emerge in the North Atlantic. So think about that. That's the maritime passages around Greenland are critical, especially as the polar ice melts. And number two, under all that ice on Greenland, which is melting, there could be untold mineral resources of enormous value to the whole world economy. And we don't want China or Russia controlling them.
Welcome to the Oracle by Polymarket. I'm Will Ward.
And I'm Mahdi Ali.
And today we are on with none other than Ambassador John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor for just over 500 days during Trump's first term. Ambassador, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Polymarket is a prediction market. We have dozens of markets where people are trying to predict Trump's policies, what he'll do next. And we only have 15 minutes this morning, so we can't get to every individual market. But I'd like to start with your big picture understanding of how Trump makes decisions. So from your book and other interviews with you, if I had to sum up sort of your analysis of Trump's style, it would be ADHD, short attention span, and transactional. But are there any countries or policy areas where this is not the case? Anything where he has a deep-seated ideological conviction?
Well, I think he has deep-seated views on some things, not because he has a philosophy that backs him up or because of a grand strategy. There's sort of like a perpetual tick that keeps coming up. So he likes low interest rates. And Jay Powell, the chairman of the Fed, is always wrong because the interest rates are never low enough. Why does he believe this? He's a real estate dealer. That's what they like. They like low interest rates, good times, bad times, expansionary times, contracting times, low interest rates. And on tariffs, he said during the campaign, it's his favorite word in the dictionary. He loves them. Unfortunately, that doesn't tell you what comes next because the rationale, the objectives for his affection for tariffs are several and they're contradictory. And that's one reason why we're in the kind of mess we're in now, apart from the fact tariffs don't work overall as a general proposition in international trade. But it also makes predicting Trump that much harder, even for those who follow him closely.
What about his stance on China? Would you say that that's a more transactional area where he's eager to make a deal, or that's something where he has this years-long obsession and sort of deep-rooted framework on?
No, I think it's transactional. I mean, he can go from being highly critical of China, which he has been really from particularly during the 2024 campaign and now, because he thinks they cost him the 2020 election. He blames China for COVID. He's not saying they unleashed it deliberately, but the COVID obviously came from China. The economy wasn't doing bad when we started 2020, but obviously it tanked because of that in 2020. And you could make a case that that was a contributing factor to Trump losing the 2020 election. But he can swing back and forth. If he really could make the biggest trade deal in human history with China, he'd think Xi Jinping was great. And he does think he has a good personal relationship with Xi, as he does with Vladimir Putin, as he does with Kim Jong-un, in his mind. Trump said of Kim, after their first meeting in Singapore, we fell in love. Well, I can guarantee you that neither Putin nor Xi nor Kim have fallen in love with Trump, nor do they think he's his friend. But they take advantage of it because you want to have good relations with your friends, and that's why Trump is amenable to deals.
Does Trump earnestly believe that these guys are his friends, or does he use it as a kind of negotiating tactic or a position to say, hey, let's get close to these guys. They've been sort of ostracized and we don't have to do that. Let's get a deal done.
Well, part of Trump's support base says everything he's doing is a bargaining technique, which it could be true. It simply means he believes in nothing, believes in absolutely nothing except getting a deal. In that light, he's actually a lot like State Department diplomats. Normal people would say you would rank deals this way: good deal, no deal, bad deal, in order of preference. At the State Department, they just love having deals. And they say, well, this isn't a very good deal, but it keeps the process alive. It keeps us negotiating. Trump's the same way in many respects, is that you can get a deal on anything if you're prepared to surrender.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we have a bunch of markets on this Trump second term geopolitical expansionism. So Greenland, Panama Canal, Canada, 51st state. Were any of these things discussed during the first term when you were around, or are these new?
No. Well, two of them were not. One was Canada's 51st state is simply not going to happen. Trump, who sees things through personal prism, didn't like Justin Trudeau. So calling him Governor Trudeau, trolling Trudeau, if Canada is just a state, he liked that. He really enjoyed it. Now, today's election day in Canada. We'll see what happens, but he may have kept the Liberal Party in power in Canada because of the way he treated the country. Panama is already solved effectively if the Chinese ports on the Atlantic and Pacific coast are indeed sold. I think the canal ceases to be an issue, as does the American invasion of Panama to get it back. Greenland is different. We did talk about this during the first term. Let me just be clear. Donald Trump did not discover Greenland. It's part of the American strategic universe. It has been for a long time. During the Cold War, we had 16 military bases in Greenland at one point. And our interest goes back to 1868, when William Seward, then Secretary of State, having successfully purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867, tried to purchase Greenland from Denmark. As late as 1947, Harry Truman offered him $100 million and couldn't buy it. So we will work out something with Greenland. We don't have to have sovereignty. I'd be willing to accept it, don't get me wrong, but we don't need to have it, and we will not invade Greenland.
What are the U.S. strategic interests? What does the U.S. need in Greenland? What's the most important 2 or 3 things that?
Well, there are two things. One is look at a map. It's part of the North American landmass. It is during the Cold War. It is now the Pitofik Space Base, used to be the Thule Air Force Base. It was the eastern anchor of the DEW line, the distant early warning line that basically went through Alaska and Canada to protect against to tell us when Soviet missiles had been launched over the pole at the United States. Greenland is a key part of what the geographers call the GIUK gap, the GIUK gap, the sea passages between the Arctic Ocean and the Atlantic, between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. China, which wants to become an Arctic power, would love to be able to sail its submarines through the Bering Strait, across the Arctic Ocean, and emerge in the North Atlantic. So think about that. The maritime passages around Greenland are critical, especially as the polar ice melts. And number 2, under all that ice on Greenland, which is melting, there could be untold mineral resources of enormous value to the whole world economy. And we don't want China or Russia controlling them. It's very straightforward and in the interest of the West as a whole to make sure that doesn't happen.
I want to pivot a little bit to Iran here. Is there anything the Iranians could do short of the falling of the theological state that would, in your mind, prevent the need to invade?
I suppose the lions could lie down with the lambs and they'd open up all of their nuclear facilities tomorrow. And anything is possible in that sense. I don't believe these guys will ever do it. I think this is critical to their image as the dominant force in the region, the dominant force within Islam. They want nuclear weapons. Don't let anybody kid you on that score. In fact, there was recently reporting out of Iran that the famous fatwa against nuclear weapons actually said that the Ayatollah Khamenei had said, it's okay to build nuclear weapons. It's just forbidden to use them. I mean, that shows how they're prepared to modify their supposed theological position to get the capability that would then threaten not just Israel, but threaten the Arab neighbors, threaten the United States, really threaten the whole world.
Ambassador, after what happened to Libya and the fall of Gaddafi, after he let go of his ambitions in weapons of mass destruction, does it feel like, we've lost legitimacy in the region, that basically any country, and not just in the region, but globally, that any country that's sort of an adversary of America says, okay, the only way to deal with them is actually to get nuclear weapons because there's no negotiating with these guys?
I don't think so. Look, Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons program and his ballistic missile program in 2003, 2004, after we had captured Saddam Hussein in a spider hole in Iraq, and Gaddafi didn't want to turn out that way. And after we had intercepted components for a uranium enrichment project in Libya shipped from the famous Pakistani nuclear proliferator AQ Khan. So I think Gaddafi knew that the game was up, and he made the right decision. The Arab Spring, which followed in 2010, 11, and 12, had nothing to do with Gaddafi giving up nuclear weapons, nor did his fall. If Gaddafi had gotten nuclear weapons and the Arab Spring had occurred, what was he going to do? Drop nuclear weapons on Libya to stop the Arab Spring? The two totally unconnected points. And I think that the real problem is you have a highly ideological, extreme theological military movement in Iran that wants nuclear weapons. That's the prototype of a state that does that and conducts terrorist operations as well. North Korea really being very similar, except leave out the theology, insert communism.
So what's the price the American people should be willing to pay through this military operation? I mean, it seems like it will cost a tremendous amount. Does it matter? Is this really an existential threat for the United States? And how do we proceed knowing that the cost is likely to be in the trillions?
Well, I don't think it'll be in the trillions at all. I think it's actually pretty cheap. I think the Israelis could do it on their own. It wouldn't cost us anything. The fact is the regime in Iran today is weaker than it's been since the revolution of 1979. There are enormous recriminations and finger pointing going on right at this minute because of the fall of Assad in Syria, loss of a hugely important Iranian ally, the pounding that Hamas and Hezbollah have taken. The people are saying, we've spent billions on these terrorist projects. What has it done for the people of Iran? So if we took out the nuclear program, I think that could be the last straw on a regime that's already under enormous pressure and is facing a leadership change at some point on the calendar with a supreme leader who's 85 years old and sick.
You said the Israelis could do it on their own. Could they do it on their own in a way that doesn't drag the U.S. in afterwards? So Israel strikes the nuclear facilities, Iran obviously counterattacks, maybe they try to close the Strait of Hormuz, then the U.S. is involved. Or how can they do it without bringing the U.S. into it?
Because the Israelis have already destroyed almost all of Iran's ballistic missile production facilities. If they finished off the remaining ballistic missiles and also finished off Hezbollah's retaliatory capability, which I think is still pretty significant, then Iran wouldn't have much to retaliate with. And the defenses that we have in the Persian Gulf could forestall any significant Iranian attack and would unquestionably at that point bring the regime down in any case.
If what you're saying is true, why would how come the Netanyahu administration has not already done this? It doesn't seem short of the ambition.
Well, for 4 years, they had Biden as president. And for 4 years, he was saying, don't do it. In the first Trump term, I think if Netanyahu had acted, I don't think Trump would have acted with him, but he certainly wouldn't have criticized and would have provided further defensive capabilities in the event of an Iranian effort to retaliate. Today, there's this another New York real estater named Steve Witkoff, who is at once our nuclear negotiator with Iran, the negotiator on the Russia-Ukraine war. And I think he's still doing Gaza refugees, too, in his spare time. So I think as long as that goes on, the Israelis are constrained. But they see this as existential. And it's one reason when they retaliated against Iran after Iran's second ballistic missile attack on Israel. Remember, there have only been 2 ballistic missile attacks in history, both Iran against Israel. But in that second Israeli retaliation, they also destroyed Iran's sophisticated Russian-supplied S-300 air defense system. So Iran is really very open to an air attack.
If you were advising other NATO countries that depend on the U.S. for a security umbrella, let's say Canada, since they're having their election today, would you advise them to stop buying U.S. military equipment, intel sharing, steps of that nature to sort of get a deal going? Or how should NATO countries be reacting to what Trump is doing?
I think the best thing to do, as irritating as it is grit your teeth and remember this fundamental fact. There are now less than 45 months left in Donald Trump's second term. If you think the world may last longer than 45 months, let's say it lasts another couple hundred years, I wouldn't cut ties with the U.S. I wouldn't assume that we're fundamentally changed. I would look at it the way I look at it, which is Donald Trump is an aberration who's causing us enormous harm, but he's not going to be there forever. And it's not at all sure that there's anything like any person who would be a successor who would be anywhere near him. Since he doesn't have a philosophy, there's no philosophy to inherit.
But you have the trade negotiations with Canada where they're saying, why should we do a new deal? You made a deal last term and you ripped it up. How these big international alliances like NATO that rely on long-term weapons packages and intel sharing, how can those countries make plans that go beyond sort of 4 years, like when the U.S. political system is just so up and down?
Well, let's say a European country said, all right, fine, we're just going to act like the United States is no longer part of NATO. How much do you think they'd accomplish in 45 months? The answer is not much. And, if you rip the alliance apart, if you give Donald Trump permission to withdraw from NATO, which in effect some Europeans have come close to doing, it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. The fact is, during the Cold War, the Soviet Union made splitting the Atlantic Alliance a high priority. One reason they lost the Cold War was they failed. It would be a real mistake if we did this to ourselves. So I'm not in any sense making excuses for Trump, but I'd say try and keep this in proportion. As bad as it is, precipitate actions by the Europeans could make it worse.
All right, we've got just a couple minutes left. I have to ask you this before we go. There's a documentary coming out called The Age of Disclosure, where 34 national security officials, admirals, senators, Marco Rubio, currently Secretary of State, are interviewed to the effect that there is a non-human intelligence that's been interacting with humanity. How do you feel about this topic? Hogwash?
Well, they haven't interacted with me. That's all I can say. And if the U.S. government had secrets about space aliens out there, I never saw them.
Well, when you were National Security Advisor in 2018 and 19, there were at least 2 incidents of UAPs involving Navy pilots that were later confirmed by the Pentagon. Were you involved in those discussions at all?
Look, there are a lot of these unidentified events. Who knows what the explanations are? Often they can come up with explanations after years go by when technology helps explain what may have happened. Is there other intelligent life in the universe? Maybe. Do I care about it? Absolutely not.
John Bolton, thank you so much. We're going to leave it there.
Glad to be with you.
All right.
Nothing in today's episode has been financial, investment, legal, or any other type of professional advice. Anything provided is for informational purposes only and is not meant to be an endorsement of any type of activity or any particular market or product. Terms of service on Polymarket.com prohibit U.S. persons and persons from certain other jurisdictions from using Polymarket to trade, although data and information is viewable globally.